The silence of the American countryside has a weight all its own. It's not just the absence of sound. It's as if the air itself is thick, made of muffled memories and unspoken secrets. The small town of Davenport, lost between straight roads and endless cornfields, seems suspended in time. Aged wooden houses, their windows always half open like half-closed eyes, watched every movement of those who dared to walk through their empty streets. It was to this place that Ethan, at the age of 17, was taken after the death of his mother. The father, unable to bear the loneliness, remarried a woman named Claire, someone he'd met just a few months ago. Beautiful, with a smile like it was carved from marble, Claire radiated confidence and a strange magnetism. There was something charming about her, yet at the same time it made Ethan uneasy. Maybe it was her gaze, always too deep, as if piercing through the skin and probing directly into the soul. The house they now lived in was far from the city, surrounded by tall trees that blocked some of the sunlight. During the day, the atmosphere was merely gloomy. At night, it was stifling. Ethan tried to adapt, but he constantly felt like he was being watched. There were no neighbors nearby, and even the few who lived nearby seemed to avoid them. In the supermarkets, whispers arose whenever Claire passed through the aisles, as if everyone knew her in a way Ethan hadn't yet. At their first dinner, tension was already creeping in. Claire cooked with meticulous, almost obsessive perfection. Each dish was arranged on the table as if in a ritual. Ethan's father seemed relieved, delighted, finally smiling after months of mourning. But Ethan noticed the details. The way she looked at him, lingering for a few seconds too long. The way she corrected her posture, her chewing, her tone of voice. These weren't advice. They were orders, masked in sweetness. One night, Ethan woke in the middle of the night. The house was silent except for a barely audible sound coming from downstairs. Light, rhythmic footsteps padded down the hallway. He crept downstairs cautiously, his heart racing. He found Claire in the living room, standing motionless at the window, staring into the darkness outside. She didn't seem surprised to find Ethan watching her. She simply smiled, a cold smile, and said, "I'm sorry. You should be sleeping, Ethan. The night brings strange thoughts." The next morning, she acted as if nothing had happened. Time began to drag. Ethan noticed his father spending extra hours at work, perhaps unconsciously escaping the heavy atmosphere of the house. This left Claire and Ethan alone for long periods. It was during these moments that his stepmother's enamel began to crack. She asked overly personal questions about fears, nightmares, memories of his dead mother. She touched on topics Ethan tried to avoid, as if she took pleasure in seeing him uncomfortable. One day, upon entering his room, Ethan found his drawer rummaged through. His notebooks were open, his notes read. Claire appeared in the doorway a few seconds later. No apology, just a fixed stare. "You write interesting things," he said, his voice too calm. "Your mind is deep." He didn't explain the reason for the break-in. He simply left, leaving the door ajar. The following days were even worse. Ethan began hearing noises at night, doors softly closing, footsteps in the hallways, breathing too close to his room. When he told his father, he just smiled and said he was imagining it. Claire, on the other hand, smiled differently, as if amused. The town itself seemed complicit in the discomfort. Whenever Ethan mentioned Claire to anyone, at the grocery store, at school, even to the local sheriff, the responses were curt and evasive. Some looked away, others changed the subject. A cloud of silence blanketed everything related to her. Ethan began to question his own sanity. Sometimes, when he woke up, he would find objects out of place, as if someone had been in his room. A photo of his mother had been removed from its frame and left on the table, partially scratched. When he showed it to his father, the photo had been returned, intact. Claire swore she had never disturbed anything. It was impossible to tell what was paranoia and what was real, but deep down, Ethan felt like the house wasn't his anymore. It was her territory. Every wall, every door, Every window seemed to conspire in Claire's favor, as if the entire space were a reflection of the twisted mind she hid behind her perfect smile. And then came the night that changed everything. Ethan woke to the sensation of someone sitting at the foot of his bed. The room was dark, but he could hear slow, measured breathing. He froze, unable to move a muscle. When he finally turned on the lamp, no one was there. But the sheet was crumpled, as if pressed by a body. In the hallway, seconds later, he heard the muffled sound of a female laugh. The muffled laughter in the hallway reverberated in Ethan's head like a relentless buzz. The next morning, Claire hummed a simple tune as she wiped the kitchen table. The smell of bleach burned her nostrils like a message. Her father had already left early. Supplier meeting. And the sunlight filtering through the trees created narrow shadows, crisscrossing lines that cut across the kitchen floor like grates. "Did you sleep well, Ethan?" she asked without looking up. "I heard someone in my room," he said, his voice firmer than he felt. "Wooden houses talk at night. You'll learn that here." The sentence landed on him with a strange weight, as if it were part of a script. Ethan began to notice a pattern. Every time he showed unease, Claire had a ready response, clean, polished, like the table. There were no rough edges to her words, and the absence of rough edges cut him to the core. In town, tornado siren tests took place every first Tuesday of the month at 12 o'clock sharp. But that day, on a farm, the siren burst into the sky at 12:07 p.m., a metallic howl that shattered the air. In the few cars passing along the road, no one slowed down. At the market, no one looked away. It was as if only Ethan had heard it. He leaned against a cereal aisle, breathless, his diaphragm locked. He saw reflected in the freezer door a reduced image of himself. Pale, eyes sunken, mouth parted in a silent O. Above, the speaker hissed and whispered something indecipherable, letters that didn't form words. "The test today was late," the cashier said, without him asking. "We get used to it." Test. We get used to it. Davenport's sentences were always plural, cushioned, as if the town wanted to protect itself from singularities. From Ethan, from Claire, he decided to go to the public library, a dark brick building with crumbling columns. He asked for the local newspaper's microfilm reels, issues from 5 or 6 years ago. He was searching without knowing exactly what, only an intuition greater than himself, an inverted magnet pulling him toward the unknown. He found corporate notices, church advertisements, garage sales, tragedies with poorly printed photos. Nothing about Claire. Until he saw a name in the obituaries of another town, 2 hours away, Clara Ann Whitaker. The grainy photo bore a smile that could easily have been Claire's, only angled differently. The death mentioned domestic accident and inconsolable husband. The newspaper postmark was old, but the date seemed fuzzy to him, as if the edges of time had been sanded away. When he asked for it to be printed, the librarian, a woman as narrow as a bookmark, smiled toothlessly. "This thing is broken. Better leave it for another day." Upon return, the microfilm envelope was labeled in pen "Retired, Sheriff." That night, Ethan began an experiment. He put his phone on airplane mode, activated the recorder, and placed it on the nightstand. He wrote 3 simple questions in a notebook, each on a separate page. "Have you been here? What do you want? Why me?" He closed the notebook, poured a glass of water over it, and lay down, feigning sleep. At 3:17 a.m., and the sound of cotton rubbing against the carpet. A pause, the kind of pause that carries weight, and the soft click of the lamp being turned on without turning on. The recording picked up something, a low drawl, like breathing through the nose, then a whisper that sounded like 2 voices stacked together out of sync. He still wakes up. When Ethan lit the glass, the water was empty, but the water hadn't spilled. The notebook, open to the second question. In thin, slanted letters, an answer, "To teach you how to stay." He closed his eyes and waited for the sentence to disappear. He opened it again. It was still there, next to a damp spot shaped like a hand. In the morning, there was no mark. The pages were clean, the glass full. The recording stopped at 3:33 and restarted at 3:18, without the passage he remembered. Claire, with her stern smile, commented casually as she washed the dishes. "You should change your phone password. Things disappear." In the bedroom, the edges of the mirror began to darken, as if a shadow had embedded itself in the metal sides. The reflection returned the image with a tiny delay, and that tiny delay was enough to drive one mad. When he walked, he saw Ethan behind Ethan, always a step away, almost in sync. Almost. One day, when he strained his gaze to catch him in the act, the reflection smiled half a second before his mouth obeyed. He knocked the mirror over. Claire came running in, theatrical, hand on her chest. What it was? The mirror. Mirrors are vain. They don't like to be looked at for too long. Ethan began avoiding windows at night. The darkness outside seemed dense. If he stared too long, he felt something staring back, measuring the distance to the skin on the back of his neck. Allison, a classmate, more out of closeness than friendship, asked him in the cafeteria why he'd been so quiet. He considered saying stepmother, house, laughter, notebook, but his tongue froze. "You know Coron Bridge?" she said, sticking a straw in her glass of milk. "Don't go there after sunset." "Why?" "Because you hear what you're trying to forget." "And what am I trying to forget?" "You're the one who knows." Coron Bridge. The name stuck to his skin like dust. On the way back, he detoured and walked to the bridge, a small worn metal structure, crossing a stream little more than a trickle. There the world seemed reduced to an eternal whisper of water lapping against stones. He closed his eyes and heard, his mother perhaps saying, "Don't delay." He opened his eyes immediately. The wind bent the grass toward the road, all at the same obedient incline, as if receiving instructions. The feeling of being pushed back made him recoil. Upon returning, the house seemed larger, not in height or width, but in intention. That same day in the fridge, a list of rules printed with delicate edges and an elegant typeface. Wash dishes immediately after use. Do not use the washing machine after 9 p.m. Do not lock the bedroom door. Respect sleep schedules. Do not walk around the house between 3h to 3:20. The 3-3-20 rule was a veiled confession. Ethan touched the paper as if feeling a scar. Claire behind him whispered, "Order breeds peace. You want peace, don't you?" The father began to talk about a treatment for adjustment, a doctor in the neighboring town, a transition specialist. Claire would schedule everything, appointments, times, prescriptions. Ethan didn't argue, but something inside him was bracing against this idea of repair. Whenever the subject came up, the landline would ring with a clean static, with no voice on the other end. When she picked up the phone, the static continued, even unplugged. Claire just raised an eyebrow and smiled as if appreciating a prediction come true. One afternoon, Ethan rummaged through the pantry for a flashlight. At the back, he found Asho box with elastic. Inside were sheets of printed tables with columns titled Stimulus, Reaction, Response Time, Recovery. In handwritten lines, he read, noise in the hallway, 5s, roll to the side, 12s, normal breathing. Displaced photo, 13s, check frame, 45s, hands tremble, siren out of hours, collapse, kneel. Insufficient. The last item was underlined. He leafed faster, the air growing thinner. The pages were dated, and the dates coincided with the days when he had felt most fragile. Curious you, he said. Curiosity is a door without a lock. He slept with the light on. At 2:59 a.m. it flickered and returned, like a giant eyelid trying to stay open. At 3 a.m., everything went dark. In the pitch black, the rhythm of the house grew louder, creaking wood, the expansion of the plumbing, the breath of cold on the glass. Someone sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress gave way under a careful weight. The smell of something bittersweet, vinegar and iron, came closer. The hand that touched his ankle was warm and dry. Ethan didn't scream. He just held his breath until the pain rose to his chest. The hand remained there, counting pulses. Then it moved away. When the light came back on at 3:21 a.m., the room was empty, and the list on the refrigerator had gained a new item, scrawled in pen. 6. Learn to stay. At school, teachers began writing Ethan's name on the board, even when he didn't raise his hand. They asked him to read it aloud, even though the page was blank. He read, and the words appeared, but not on the board, in his head, projected against the inside of his skull, in cursive black ink. All houses talk, some dictate. In the bathroom, the sink faucet turned on its own. Instead of water, there was a trickle of static, a dense noise that came and went like radio waves. He wet his hands with the sound and felt his fingers tingle. Glancing in the mirror for a moment, he saw Claire behind him, very close. He turned. No one. He turned back. The mirror was fogged inside, as if it were breathing. In the afternoon, Allison called him to the lawn behind the gym. "You need to get out of that house," he said simply, as if pointing to an open door. "Where would I go?" "There is an old church on top of the hill, Bethel First. Nobody uses it. They say the pastor abandoned the pulpit in the middle of a sermon and never returned. There, if you knock on wood 3 times, the echo returns a name." "What name?" "The name you have inside and don't remember." "And have you tried?" "I don't forget my name." Claire's soft laughter crept in again later that night. But this time there was another layer, a wordless corner, similar to the one she'd hummed earlier, only scratchy, as if the melody had been recorded on a different tape. The living room clock struck 13 at 11 o'clock. The hands finished their cycle and stopped on the number 3. Ethan walked barefoot down the hallway, the rough carpet biting at his heels. Her bedroom door was ajar. Inside, a low amber light and moving shadows, not of people but of suspended objects, silverware dangling from strings like uncoordinated pendulums, a cup spinning silently, the wedding portrait turned to the wall. Claire sat at the foot of the bed, back straight, hands on her knees, eyes wide open. She was talking to someone who wasn't there. It's almost there. All that's missing is the mirror part. Ethan recoiled, his heart pounding in his windpipe. From the hallway, the house breathed. A long sigh that stirred the curtains even though the windows were closed. The next day, he went to Bethel First. The hill was the back of a sleeping animal. The church, a hollow shell with broken glass and pews stacked in a corner. He climbed to the pulpit, the floor groaning under his feet. He knocked on the wood once. The echo returned the blow. Twice. The same. The third time he heard clearly, "Stay." It wasn't a name, it was a command, and it sounded exactly like the overlapping voices on the recording. 2 discordant timbres, one very close to her mother's. On the way back, the road seemed longer, as if Davenport had been stretched between 2 streetlights. When he arrived, he found his father in the living room, eyes red, smelling of whiskey. "Claire is trying," he said. "You need to cooperate." Ethan wanted to ask, collaborate with what? But realized that in his father's mouth the word collaborate was something else. Surrender. He opened his mouth to say no, and the sound that came out was yes. Claire appeared behind the sofa, her hand on her husband's shoulder. "The doctor will see us tomorrow, at 3 in the afternoon. Punctually." The word 3 sounded like a magnet touching a compass. The world turned half a degree. In the early hours of the morning, Ethan tried to leave through the back door. The doorknob turned all the way and stopped, as if a hand on the other side were holding it, calm, patient, unhurried. He pressed his forehead against the cool wood and felt a pulsar, not his, the house's. A rhythm that passed through the door and dripped into his skull, synchronizing until he lost track of where the wood ended and the skin began. He staggered back to his room. In the hallway, the list of rules now had a footnote in smaller font. "When you understand, the door will no longer be needed." At school, Allison didn't show up. Her empty chair hurt more than I'd like to admit. At the end of the day, the sheriff waited for him outside, leaning against his car, his thumb busy on his holster like someone dozing standing up. "Your stepmother called," he said. "She's worried. Some boys disappear when they don't want to grow up." I didn't disappear. Not yet. As night fell, Claire brought him a mug of tea. "It's for better sleep," he said. "I learned the recipe from someone who knew your fears." "Who?" She smiled, her face softening, and for a moment he almost smiled back. "You already know." Ethan left the mug on the table untouched. At 3 a.m., he woke and went to the kitchen. The mug was empty. His tongue tasted metallic, and his memory, between lying down and getting up, was a plowed field, long, parallel furrows, without a single seed. Looking at his notebook, he found 3 new questions he didn't remember writing. If I stay, who will leave? If so, who stays in you? Do you remember your mother's name? Below, an answer. Try. He tried to say it out loud, but only air came out. On Sunday, Claire suggested a drive through the cornfields. The road was so long it seemed made up. The sound of tires on asphalt was a dull mantra. At one point, she slowed to a near stop. In the rows of corn, every ear was facing inwards, as if obeying a curfew order. Claire pointed out, "They learn." Learn what? The direction of fear. Later, lying down, Ethan finally understood that he wasn't just facing a woman. Faceta curve in reality, a gentle bend that made things almost as they always were, only with a degree of twist the mind couldn't accommodate. Claire was the hand holding the bend, but whole city, it was the table where the fabric was being pulled. He wrote one last sentence before the lights flickered. "If I don't exist when she's not there, why do I miss the air when she leaves?" When he looked up, he saw, in the window glass, the silhouettes of 2 people, him and her. Butter was not standing. He was leaning slightly forward, as if pulled by an invisible hook stuck in his sternum. And she was behind him, very close, her chin almost touching the back of his neck. The image flickered. In the next reflection, there was only one person. The position, however, kept both places occupied. In the hallway, the refrigerator list would creak if it could. Item 6 was underlined twice, and a sentence appeared below, without pen, without ink, like recorded in plastic by the heat of a hand. "Tomorrow, mirrors." The living room clock never kept accurate time again. Sometimes it ran, sometimes it stopped. Other times it ran backward, as if mocking its own function. Ethan noticed that Claire didn't care. In fact, she seemed to be guided by it. When the clock stopped, she walked more slowly, as if time had truly dissolved. When it ran backward, she smiled wider, a toothy smile, as if savoring the undoing of the minutes. That morning, Ethan found his father sitting in the kitchen, an untouched cup of coffee in front of him. His eyes were hollow and empty, his skin sallow, as if he'd been up all night without sleep. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked. His father looked up slowly, but his gaze seemed elsewhere. "She only wants the best for us," he murmured. "You don't understand. I can finally sleep when she sings." Ethan froze. That scratchy melody, that wordless chant, was now stuck in his father's mind as well. The world outside offered no refuge. At school, Ethan noticed his classmates looking at him strangely, as if they knew something he didn't. Allison hadn't returned. Her seat was still empty, untouched. The teacher never mentioned her. Once, Ethan asked about her, and everyone laughed, not cruelly, but as if it were an inside joke from which he'd been left out. In the library, the space reserved for the local newspaper was sealed with yellow tape. "Maintenance," the note read, but there was no dust or signs of repair. The librarian walked past and murmured, "Reading too much. Makes your head sick." That night, Ethan locked himself in his room, even though the rules said not to. He pushed the dresser against the door, turned on the light, and stared at the new mirror his father had hung, a gift from Claire. The reflection wasn't immediate. It lingered for a second, sometimes 2. He moved his hand and saw the reflection hesitate, as if deciding whether to follow him. "Who are you?" he asked in a low voice. The reflection smiled before he did. The sound came next, the ticking of the clock, but inside the mirror, not in the room, The hand moved behind the glass even though the real clock was stopped in the living room. Ethan felt his chest tighten, his heart beating out of step with the reflected time. He moved closer, and the reflection spoke, without moving its lips. "Don't fight. Staying hurts less." The glass rippled like water. Ethan stumbled back. The light went out on its own. In the darkness, he heard footsteps behind him. When he turned, no one was there. When he turned back to the mirror, he saw Claire standing behind him, her hand raised as if to touch his shoulder. He turned again. Empty. In the mirror, however, she remained there, motionless, her eyes too dark, too deep to reflect anything. Sanity began to leak like water through invisible cracks. Ethan would wake up in places around the house without remembering how he got there. Once in the attic, another in the basement. In the basement, he found old boxes of photographs, different families, children close in age to his, all with a woman in the background. The names varied: Clara, Clarice, Claire. The face, however, was always the same. In some photos, the children were smiling. In others, they were blurry, as if they had moved too quickly when the photo was taken. But their eyes always looked out of the frame, directly at the person holding the image. At the kitchen table days later, Claire was waiting for him with a steaming cup of tea. "You've been fighting so hard," he said, his tone mildly reproving. "This only delays the inevitable." Ethan didn't answer. "You feel it, don't you? That Davenport isn't just a town. That home isn't just wood and cement. It's bigger than you. Bigger than all of us." He looked up, trying to face her. "What are you?" Claire smiled, but there was sadness in the gesture, as if it were a role rehearsed 1,000 times. "I'm the part you can't let go of." That night, the house began to throb. The walls vibrated in a slow rhythm, like deep breaths. The ceiling creaked like ribs. Ethan covered his ears, but the sound came from inside. The mirror's reflection no longer showed the room. It showed an empty field, the bridge, the church, the cemetery, all at once, as if the entire town had been swallowed by a single space. And in the center, Claire, staring directly at him. "You're already staying." The father knocked on the door, his voice tired. "Son, open up. She knows what's best. She always has." Ethan leaned against the corner of his room, trembling, his heart racing. The list on the refrigerator echoed in his mind. Each rule more absurd than the last, but now it seemed natural, inevitable. He knew the next step was the mirror. He knew he had to face it, but he feared he wouldn't return. On the last morning of the week, at exactly 3 a.m., the mirror glowed on its own, illuminating the room. The reflection no longer mirrored him. It was a different Ethan, with tired eyes and paler skin, but smiling with a strange relief. The reflection reached out from the glass. Ethan recoiled, but the glass expanded like liquid, touching his arm with a biting coldness. Claire appeared in the doorway, whispering as if in prayer. "Let him in. Let him stay." Ethan screamed, but no sound came out. Only silence. The reflection tugged at his skin, and the entire house shook like a lung about to burst. The real world and the reflected one were merging, and he no longer knew which side he was breathing on. The reflection didn't disappear. Even after that early morning, when the mirror once again seemed like glass and the morning light filtered through the cracks in the curtains, Ethan still felt the other's presence. A shadow clinging to his skin, a parasitic twin breathing within his bones. Each time he blinked, it was as if he were giving it space to move a little closer. Claire feigned normalcy. She poured coffee, arranged flowers on the table, whistled fragmented melodies that always sounded like the same song, only in different keys. Her father continued to feel increasingly empty, as if he only functioned within her cycle. Wake, smile, work, sleep. His eyes no longer saw Ethan. They saw through him, as if his son had already been swallowed by the same void that consumed the city. Ethan tried to resist. He avoided the mirror, kept busy at school, walked to the bridge to feel the cold air cut through his lungs. But the further he got, the stronger the invisible pull back home. The city seemed to warp around him. Streets that ended where they shouldn't. Traffic lights that turned on their own. Voices whispered on the radio even when it was turned off. It was as if Davenport wasn't a place, but an organism, and Claire was its mouth. One afternoon he found a piece of paper folded in 4 on the door of his school locker. The letters were shaky, as if written in a hurry. "She's not the first, and you won't be the last." There was no signature. When he looked around, no one was paying attention. When he opened it again, the paper was blank. Paranoia became his only companion. Ethan began to lose track of the days. He woke at different times than he had gone to sleep, memories becoming jumbled. Dreams and waking hours no longer knew the boundaries. Sometimes he saw his mother, or a copy of her, sitting at the foot of his bed, hair disheveled, eyes moist. When he tried to touch her, the image dissolved into smoke. Other times, he woke with the sensation of hands clamped around his throat, red marks that faded within minutes. The mirror became inescapable. He tried to ignore it, but he felt its gaze, its call. One night, he couldn't resist. He approached and stared at himself, or almost. The reflection had different eyes, black, deep as caves. His mouth opened and soundless words echoed straight through his mind. "You don't belong on that side." The glass pulsed like a heart. Ethan reached out without realizing it. The cold pierced his skin, burning inside, and for a moment he felt whole, as if he had finally found the place that accepted him. Then Claire's voice cut through the air. "It's too late to choose, Ethan. You've always been with me." Behind him, in the room, Claire stood still, but her reflection was different. In the mirror, she moved independently, smiling wider, as if the real her were there, not in the physical world. The father came in next, but he didn't look like himself. His eyes were cloudy, as if he'd been crying for days. "Son, listen to your stepmother. She knows what's best." The word stepmother sounded distorted, as if it wasn't enough to define her. Ethan recoiled. The reflection didn't. The other Ethan advanced against the glass, his hand open, his smile serene. The entire room seemed to contract, walls breathing, the floor creaking like bones. The air grew thick, impossible to swallow. He tried to run, but the doors were closed, sealed by something larger than wood and metal. His father blocked the exit. Claire watched, and the mirror called. At the last moment, Ethan closed his eyes. When he opened them, he was alone. The room was empty, the mirror was opaque, but in the depths of the glass, almost invisible, he saw the shadow of himself smiling patiently as if waiting. The list on the refrigerator had now been rewritten in perfect, flawless handwriting. Accept the house. Accept the city. Accept Claire. Accept the reflection. Accept the end. In the footer, a final line. And when you accept, you will discover that it was never you who lived here. That night, Ethan didn't sleep. Not because he was afraid, but because he finally understood that fear was the only thing keeping him human. When the fear disappeared, so would he. The things that survive a story are not the same as those that entered it. Sometimes they are not even things. They are rhythms, a clock that insists on marking 13 o'clock, a wordless whisper that finds the exact frequency of your auditory nerve, the anonymous breath that learns to live behind your mirror. After that last list on the refrigerator, except the end, no one in Davenport said Ethan left, nor did anyone say he stayed. His chair in the classroom was not removed. The inspector wiped the seat and scratched the name in the diary, but the wood continued to make the same soft creaking sound every time the professor said present to someone else. The sheriff, who guarded rolls of microfilm like a fossil, closed the obituaries section for permanent maintenance. The librarian learned to walk without casting a shadow at noon. And Ethan's father began sleeping dreamlessly, which is a very organized kind of death. Claire remained impeccable. New flowers twice a week, the edges of the towels ironed, the wordless corner aligned with the ticking of the living room clock. Those who saw her at the market swore she had always been there. Those who saw her for the first time had the ridiculous feeling of recognizing her from childhood. This is not uncommon in small towns. What is rare is, this is true. Already Bethel First, the church that returned names, the pulpit gained a triangular crack. 3 knocks began to return an irregular echo. Phi, that, be. There wasn't enough wind to explain the movement of the curtains. The grass outside insisted on lying down, inside, as if the hill breathed with the ship. Anyone who dared to say miracle found that the word stuck on their tongue, converted into another less pious word, habit. A chorro. Bridge continued to cross almost nothing, and yet no one with any sense passed by after sunset. The stream learned to copy voices. Sometimes it would return its mother's, sometimes its own, but 2 semitones lower, as if coming from a deeper chest. The metal railing gained small marks at 3-finger intervals, the exact height of a hand holding and waiting. When it rained, the drips would cluster together, parting at 3:21 a.m. Punctuality is a type of faith. Rumors said that Allison had returned to the neighboring town. Then they said she had never studied there. Then, that her name was a mispronunciation, an echo of a reversed call. On the wall behind the gym, someone had painted a crooked heart with 3 vertical lines. Below, in chalk, "I don't forget my name." The rain washed away the chalk. The heart remained. The house on the road, everyone called it at home as if each person had their own and at the same time there was only one, learned new discreet tricks. The floor, for example, began to creak a board before you stepped on it. The lights adopted a code. 2 rings, pause, 1 ring, pause, 3 rings, a language that only makes sense when you already obey it. And the bedroom mirror, replaced twice due to a supposed manufacturing defect, began to show a different delay for each resident. Half a second for the father, nothing for Claire, a perfect second for any visit with fresh morning. On Tuesday nights, which, as every city knows, are Thursday nights in disguise, the tornado siren insisted on going off at 12:07 p.m. In the videos recorded by teenagers, there is no noise at all. In the bone of the ear, there is. And it's curious how everyone learns to move their body a few centimeters to the left in those seconds, as if giving way to something they can't see. Education is the pretty name for regular fear. If you put together all these tiny fragments of reality, you'll get the outline of a logic. And if, in the end, you ask what is Claire, you may miss the chance to understand what are you when you stay. Because the opposite of go away never wastes a stay. The opposite of leaving is be stayed. To be treated as furniture, inventory, part of the plant. There are houses that people rent out. There are cities that rent families. The less bearable truth isn't that Ethan went through the glass. It's that something went through Ethan and learned to speak with his saliva, to move with his legs, to sign his name with the same old mistake on the middle H. Does that solve it? No. Just change the insolence. You'll continue to lean your forehead against the cold wood at 3 a.m. and feel the pulsar on the other side. You'll still think it was an old pipe. You will. We'll continue. It is a word that chews up whoever pronounces it. There were those who tried to help. Pastors from abroad, therapists with certificates from faraway universities, an amateur videographer who promised to unmask the hoax and left with the clean white tape. Zealously non-existent a physics teacher wanted to measure mirror delay with a digital metronome. He stopped when he noticed the device speeding up and slowing down, along with your heart. A skeptic laughed, measured, published. No one read it. The file lost the odd paragraphs. The PDF version doesn't allow it. Copy and paste. And yet life went on, as people like to say when they can't name what's changed. Ethan's father began sweeping the porch at 6:03 a.m. every day, in any weather. The movement of his arm traces, without him realizing it, the same semicircle it would make if he were sweeping. A glass inside. Sometimes he stops, looks at the road, scratches the place between his eyebrows, where for a moment, the memory of a child saying, "Dad," is lit up. This moment is the size of a corn kernel, and yet it contains an entire plantation. Claire has learned a new song. It has 3 notes, none of which hurt. That's why she's dangerous. The songs that don't hurt, they don't warn us. There are nights when she sings it to no one, and there are nights when she is silent so that he sings at home. In both, the same thing happens. Someone in town wakes up with the certainty that their name was changed while they slept. They go to the mirror to confirm. The mirror doesn't disagree. The person laughs and goes back to sleep. In Davenport, laughter is an agreement. If you think this is too much geography for too little metaphysics, fine. Say it's superstition. Say it's coincidence. Say it's there is madness in mourning, and that teenagers are ghost factories. You can say, the house doesn't take offense, she waits. If you live far away, the house will learn the way. 3 missed connections from unknown number, first at 12:07 on a Tuesday, then at 3:00 a.m. from a farm, then at any time you are not looking. If you don't answer unknown numbers, the noise will come through the sink pipe. You will open the tap, water will come out. Then clean static, you'll run your hand through this water that is noise and your skin will tingle with a small electric joy. It's just the beginning. The house is generous. It teaches slowly. There is also the bridge method for those who need proof. Every city has one, even if it's not called Choro Bridge. Sometimes it's a footbridge, sometimes a pedestrian tunnel, sometimes the invisible line between the kitchen and the hallway. At night, stay there. Don't speak. 3 long breaths. The name you forgot will return. In second voice, someone singing along without words. When this happens, do not correct. Don't say, that's not my name. The city doesn't like people who correct things. The city prefers people who accepted. And if you happen to have a mirror you bought last year at home, try the test your physics teacher tried. Raise your hand and count how long it takes for it to move back. If it's exactly a second, smile. The instrument is correctly calibrated. Now try it, don't smile. See what the reflection does. If it smiles the same way, close the light. Wait for 3 hours. When the light comes back on, you'll know what to do with the refrigerator. Rule 0. Do not write anything that you are not willing to obey. Ethan, what can you say about someone who may never have been a whole person anywhere? There are days when the city speaks for him, and you will recognize the voice. There are days when he speaks for the city, and you will recognize the silence. In supermarkets far away, a female laugh sometimes rings out between the aisles of drinks as if it had been transported in the cracked plastic packaging. In roadside motels, a cheap clock insists on stopping at 3:21. In public restroom mirrors, someone will see, for a second, a dark-haired boy with tired eyes. He won't ask for help. He doesn't need it. He's already on the side that helps. And now, you who stayed until here, who lent his eyes, his hands that scrolled the screen, his heart that modulated an extra beat to accompany the house step. There is an unintentional label on this. You opened the door. Maybe without knowing. Maybe knowing. Anyway, thanks. Thank you for giving up a few seconds of your watch to Davenport's. Thank you for letting the wordless song occupy the space between 2 thoughts. Thank you for learning, even if you didn't want to, the direction of fear. If later you notice a slight delay in the reflex when brushing your teeth, don't be scared. It's natural the first few nights. If you hear 3 knocks coming from inside the wall, do not answer. The house is only measuring you. If at 7 minutes past 12, the street appears to lean slightly to the left, adjust the body. It's a gesture of good neighborliness. And if the phone rings without any sound on the other end, say your name slowly. Pay attention to how he comes back. If it comes in 2 voices, congratulations. You've been heard. Thank you for to stay. Thank you for stayed. If you want to continue this conversation, comment what your city's bridge would return if you crossed it at 3 a.m. Tell me which rule first appeared on your refrigerator door. Tell me, if you can, the name the mirror gave you back when you didn't smile. Not to comfort ourselves, to tell. So the house knows where you live without having to ask. After all, stories don't end. They learn to live. Stories don't end. They hide in small places like dust behind the mirror, waiting for someone to move the right piece of furniture to free them. You might think you've closed this narrative, but it's the narrative that closed you. The rules Ethan read on the refrigerator door are just a draft of the larger manual. This manual isn't written on paper or in stone. It's printed on every object you touch, when you believe you are alone. The faucet that drips at precise intervals, the click of the refrigerator at 3 in the morning, the half-second delay when you turn on your phone's front camera. These are reminders. It's not Davenport who writes them. It's not Claire. It's Davenport himself. Space between you and the world, an invisible interval that demands obedience. You think you live within it. In fact, it lives within you. And if all this seems like overkill, try a simple test tonight. Look in the mirror for 3 minutes without looking away. Count each breath. Notice the moment your reflection breathes after you. When this happens, don't interrupt, don't run away, just smile. If the reflection smiles along, you are still yours. If the reflection smiles a second before, you are no longer. And when you find out, don't scream. The house doesn't like noise.